Well, welcome back. In this video I'll finish off the rear end. So I'm not sure what this part's called, but the drive hub, I suppose, is that little spacer in there. I think is my opportunity to get this rim to move over a bit further. So you can see it here as it goes in. There's actually a bit of room available there, I think, to machine that little bush down. So what I do first is just take the neck out of this radius, so just square it off a little bit to allow that plate to go in a bit further, and then what I do is I remove that bush that's in the end of the drive plate and turn it down so the whole plate can sit in a bit lower. So here's the bush, and it's very important that all of the contact is on the inner races of the bearings and not creating side load. So I need to be careful that I don't take off too much. But you can see here, I think I can machine a bit off of here, and this will allow that plate to sit in a bit deeper. So I turn this off, turn this down, and I'll take about, as you can see here, 2.6, nearly 3 mil. Knock it back in, and then as you can see, it sits in deeper. So what this means now is there's a couple of things I need to do. One is modify the rubbers slightly so that can go in that far, and then I need to take a little bit off of the edge here. So this rim doesn't fit in my lathe, so I had to improvise. So I just got my grinder out, put it on the drive shaft, and I ground off about 3 mil of that outer edge, equivalent to what I machined off of the bush. And all that's doing is just allowing the dust cover to sit in the right spot, because if I didn't do that, it'd just rub on the diff. So this turned out really good actually. So here it is here after I've ground a little bit off, and you can see it sits in deeper. It's flush with the outside and pretty much ready to go in. So for those that have pulled these apart before, you can see I put the rubbers in, and the only thing I've done is just cut off the little joiner piece that's normally there, just to help install, and that's to allow that to go in a bit deeper. So put the screws in, put the dust cover back in. It looks completely standard, and what I've done on that rim has allowed me to move over about 3, probably a little bit touch more than 3 mil, and the machining I did on the diff has given me about 5 or 6 mil. So all up, I think I'm moving this over somewhere between 8 and 9 millimeters. So, and I'm thinking it is enough. So here's a new disc I bought as well, so just putting that on. I've gone this far, so I figured I'd just take this differential out again and polish it. There's nothing hard about this, but I just start off with 40 grit sandpaper, then I'll get my orbital sander out a bit because there was a bit of corrosion on there, and then I just slowly work my way through with different sandpapers. So go 40, 80, 120, I think I went 160, and then I went to wet and dry 400, and then I finished up on 600. So the amount of polishing or the quality of your polishing is really going to be dependent on the prep work. So the more you're prepared to sand and wet and dry, the better it'll come out. So I spent probably 3 or 4 hours on this. There's a lot of little corners that makes it much trickier, but you know, I think it's worth the effort. So at this point I'm on to wet and dry, so that's 400 wet and dry, and then I'll go over it again with 600, and then I'll start polishing. So you can see here it's come up pretty clean already. Like in my previous video when I polished the struts, you put them on the polisher. It is important to use the various grades of buffing compound, and also use a different buffer for each compound so you don't contaminate them. So this is a hard one, hard wheel. I like to start on the hard wheel because it's a bit more aggressive. So that's an 8-inch wheel, and then I swap it over to a smaller wheel which is about 3-inch here, and that just allows me to get into the corners a bit better. So go around over and over. Started with the black compound, then I went brown, blue and white. Got the Dremel out to get really into these corners with a little buffing wheel, and once I got that far I just slowly worked my way through with the finer compounds until this was completely polished up, and you know, really happy with the way it's turned out. So here's with a smaller wheel but a soft wheel, bit of hand polish in the end, and it's come out great. So all I'm doing here is cleaning out a bit of the polish that got caught up in the lettering, and that's as good as done. So I think polishing these parts as you go along in the builds makes it a bit easier compared to doing it all in one go at the end. So I'm trying to progressively get things set up for the final assembly. So I've done the front now, I've done this rear end. The rear rim fits great, and this now sets me up to go to the next stage, which I'll probably look at sorting the wiring out. So there's the polishing, looks awesome. The only thing I still need to do on that is just put some new oil in it, and should be good to go. Putting this back in is a bit tricky, lining the shaft up, but you know, it's not too bad. So once I got to this point, I also had to machine this sleeve. So because I machined that that diff earlier, I had to machine this down to allow the rim to sit in a bit deeper. So this is the stock sleeve, it's 69.5. I put it in the lathe and I machined 5mm off of that. And the reason is, you can see here from the mods I did on the diff, when I turn this over you'll see a gap. It's just over 5, nearly 6mm. And by machining that sleeve down, I can close the gap and move that rim over quite a bit. So there it is, machined, gone from 69.5 to 64.5 or 4. It's still proud, it's still sitting on the inner race, and it's a little bit hard to see here, but what I've done is close that gap right down. There's still a small gap. Fiddle this on, put some grease, and then I trial fit the rim for the last time, just check that the dust cover doesn't hit. I put the disc on as well, and it's a bit of a tight fit. I have to have the bolts loose on the diff just to get it over slightly. Fits on. Once it's positioned, it's still, with a 150 tyre, still clears that swing arm, which is incredible, by about 3mm, and it's now pretty much in the centre. So once I had a position, tightened that up, put the shaft in, and I had a roller. So you can see here the tyres ended up right in the middle of the bike, and if anything it might be a millimetre or two. It's really that close, it doesn't matter now. So there's a walk around. I'm so happy with the way these conversions have gone. See the front end there with the big disc, and the rear, 4-inch rear with a 150 tyre has worked out really good. So next video, what I'll start to do is I'll remove the fuel tank, I'll clear out the airbox and all of the old wiring, and then I'll start putting a plan together to complete the wiring, including the speedo and blinkers and so forth. So still a lot more to go, but stay tuned.